Tantor Audio presents Operation Gladio, the Unholy Alliance between the Vatican, the CIA, and the Mafia, by Paul L. Williams, Ph.D. Narrated by Michael Prichard. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. By their fruits you will recognize them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes, or figs from thistles? Likewise every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus by their fruits you will recognize them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 through 23. Apologia. I know what you're thinking. The author of this book must be a Baptist. It's a common assumption. Most Welsh people are Baptists, and Williams is a Welsh name. But names are deceptive. I was born and raised a Roman Catholic. My parish was St. John the Baptist Church in West Scranton, where I learned by rote the Baltimore Catechism and sang Panis Angelicus with the choir. I wrote J.M.J., Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, on the right-hand corner of my composition papers, went to confession every Saturday afternoon, and received Holy Communion at Sunday Mass. I participated in all the rites and rituals, the 40-hour devotion to the Blessed Sacrament, the recitation of the litanies to the saints, and the yearly novenas at St. Anne's Basilica. In those Tridentan days the liturgy was in Latin, which gave the Mass a sense of timelessness and the assurance that the teachings of Holy Mother Church were semper eadem, always the same, binding the generations in one system of belief. I had my throat blessed on the feast of St. Blaise, and my forehead anointed with ashes on the first day of Lent. I wore a St. Christopher's medal and a scapular. I fasted and abstained on the days appointed, and received all the sacraments, save holy orders and extreme unction. As a graduate student at Drew University, my mentor was Father Gabriel Colas, an Augustinian monk, who provided rigorous instruction in the patristics and medieval Latin. After receiving my doctorate, I taught religion and the humanities at the University of Scranton, a Jesuit institution, and served as the editor of the annual proceedings of the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars. I also penned a number of articles on Vatican II and the effects of aggiornamento for National Review, where I met William Buckley, the celebrated CIA spook. I encountered the wrath of Rome while writing everything you always wanted to know about the Catholic Church for Doubleday. Doubleday, at that time, was a publishing outlet for the Catholic Church through its imprint, Image Books, and an imprimatur was considered a prerequisite for publication. My clerical overseers found no fault with my handling of the evolution of doctrine and the matter of the pontiffs who later were decried as heretics. The problem arose with the subject of the Church's temporalities. I was told to expunge all references to the Vatican Bank, including the donation of Mussolini, the Ambrosiano affair, and the P2 scandal. These topics had garnered headlines throughout the world, and to exclude them from a book with a tell-all title would be an act of obsequiousness that bordered on cowardice. I refused to make the suggested cuts, and was supported in my decision by Patricia Kosman, my intrepid editor. In 1990, the work was published by Doubleday without a nihil obstat, the declaration that nothing about the work is contrary to the faith, despite the fact that it contained no canonical errata. In subsequent years I probed deeper into the affairs of Vatican Incorporated during my tenure as the editor and publisher of the Metro, and as a consultant, CI9, for the FBI. My findings, including the ties between the Vatican and Gambino crime family, constituted the core of The Vatican Exposed: Money, Murder, and the Mafia, which was published by Prometheus in 2001. For the past 14 years I have been engaged in combing all available government records regarding the Vatican, the CIA, and the Mafia. The task has been grueling, since most of the files, even the files of Pope Paul VI, Michel Sindona, Roberto Calvi, Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, and other individuals long dead, remain classified. Any disclosure of their contents would represent a threat to national security. Fortunately, enough information has come to light in recent years that listeners can obtain a complete account of the unholy alliance of Gladio. Am I still a Catholic? Suffice it to say, anyone who attempts to come to terms with the facts presented in this audiobook will have his faith in Holy Mother Church compromised, if not shattered. Chapter 1. The Stay-Behind Units. The Association for Responsible Dissent estimates that by 1987, 6 million people had died as a result of CIA covert operations. Former State Department official William Bloom correctly calls this an American Holocaust. The CIA justifies these actions as part of its war against communism. But most coups do not involve a communist threat. Unlucky nations are targeted for a wide variety of reasons, not only threats to American business interests abroad, but also liberal or even moderate social reforms, political instability, the unwillingness of a leader to carry out Washington's dictates, and declarations of neutrality in the Cold War. Indeed, nothing has infuriated CIA directors quite like a nation's desire to stay out of the Cold War. Steve Kangas, A Timeline of CIA Atrocities, 1994. We're fighting the wrong enemy. Alan Dulles, the Swiss director of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, came to this conclusion at the close of 1942, when the German infantry remained mired in the mud and snow of the Russian steppes. He had received word via Vatican messengers from Schutzstaffel SS Chief Heinrich Himmler and Walter Schellenberg, head of the Sicherheitsdienst, the SS Foreign Intelligence Service, that the Nazi government wished to establish a separate peace with the United States. Such reconciliation would enable the Third Reich to turn its undivided attention to pulverizing the Soviets. When Dulles expressed his openness to discuss the proposal, the German High Command sent Prince Max von Hohenlohe, a Prussian aristocrat and businessman, to meet with him in Bern. Hohenlohe was surprised to learn that Dulles not only endorsed the Nazi proposal, but also maintained that a strong Germany was necessary as a bulwark against Bolshevism, the Leninist branch of the Communist Party that had seized control of Russia in 1917. Seeing Red. In a series of communiques with William Wild Bill Donovan, the OSS chief in Washington, Dulles expressed his eagerness to pursue the peace negotiations, believing that the Soviets posed a far greater threat to the United States and to the stability of the Western world than the Nazis. The Soviets, Dulles maintained, committed acts of genocide that far surpassed the pogroms of the Third Reich. They endorsed a godless ideology that called for world revolution and the collapse of capitalism. They believed that human history was governed by the process of dialectical materialism, the idea that any current economic order would always give rise to its opposite, a process that would terminate in the creation of a stateless state, built on the common ownership of goods and property. Dulles had problems with the Nazis. Their goal of 1,000-year Reich and their division of mankind into Übermenschen and Untermenschen. But the Nazis were Christians. They retained a Hegelian sense of history, which explained the rise and fall of governments in terms of a spiritual process, and they shared with Americans a common Western heritage. Even more importantly, the Nazis believed in capitalism and the right of private property. They even had minted the word Reprivatisierung, reprivatizing, for their policy of restoring to their former owners the properties that had been seized by the government, a policy that went against the leftist trends that were spreading throughout Europe. The Great Seducer. A scion of the Eastern establishment in the United States, Dulles came from a distinguished family of political dignitaries. John W. Foster, his maternal grandfather, had served as Secretary of State under Benjamin Harrison, and Robert Lansing, his uncle by marriage, had been Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State. A tweedy, pipe-smoking corporate lawyer, Dulles, with his snake-like charm and Machiavellian ambition, had been credited with seducing over 100 women, including Clare Boothe Luce, the wife of Henry Luce, founder of Time and Life, and Queen Frederica of Greece. Dulles entered the diplomatic service in 1916 and was stationed in Vienna and later Bern. From 1922 to 1926, he served as the chief of the Near East Division of the U.S. State Department. He left this post to join the Wall Street law firm of Sullivan and Cromwell, where his brother, John Foster Dulles, was a partner. Sullivan and Cromwell floated bonds for Krupp AG, the German arms manufacturer, and managed the finances of IG Farben, the German chemical conglomerate that manufactured Zyklon B, the gas that would be used to murder millions of Jews. In addition to his law practice, Allen Dulles was elected in 1927 as the first president of the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, an organization of high-ranking government officials, wealthy industrialists, and prominent bankers. The purpose of the CFR was to engineer a U.S. foreign policy of interventionism in order to make the world safe for democracy. His ties to this organization would have a profound effect on the undertakings of Operation Gladio. Galen's guerrillas. Having established contact with Hitler's high command, Dulles conducted meetings in Bern with Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen, the head of German military intelligence. Gehlen was a stiff, unassuming man with sparse blonde hair, a toothbrush mustache, and ears that stuck out of his head like radar antennas. Knowing that the defeat of the Third Reich was inevitable, he had concocted the idea of forming clandestine guerrilla squads composed of Hitler Youth and die-hard fascist fanatics, as stay-behind units. These units, Gehlen informed Dulles, would serve as a police force to ward off a post-war Soviet invasion. The Nazi general referred to the members of his secret army as werewolves, individuals who would function as ordinary citizens by day and communist killers by night. Each werewolf unit, Gehlen said, had access to buried depots of food, radio equipment, weapons, and explosives. Believing the Soviets planned a takeover of Germany and Western Europe at the conclusion of the war, Dulles became convinced that the OSS must reach out to these stay-behind armies in order to supply them with tactical and strategic assistance. This task, he informed Donovan and the OSS top brass in Washington, could be accomplished through Gehlen and SS General Karl Wolff, another Nazi Dulles had become friends with. The Aryan Ideal. Wolff conformed to the Aryan ideal. 6 feet tall, blond hair, blue eyes, and a high forehead. He was commissioned as an SS Sturmführer in February 1932. 5 years later, he was third in command of the entire SS. His principal assignment was the arrangement of transportation of Jews to concentration camps. Wolf excelled at this task to such a degree that he was later charged with complicity in the murder of 300,000 men, women, and children. In 1942, as a reward for his service, Wolf was appointed by Hitler to serve as the SS adjutant to Mussolini and the Italian government. Along with securing and fortifying the werewolves, Dulles busied himself with arranging the separate peace with the Nazis that would exclude the Soviet Union. This undertaking became known as Operation Sunrise. The separate peace should be signed without delay, Dulles informed Donovan, since it would allow the Wehrmacht, the combined armed forces of Nazi Germany, to deploy 3 divisions from northern Italy to the Eastern Front, where they could combat the Red Army. When Stalin became aware that such negotiations were underway, he went ballistic, accusing his U.S. allies of bad faith and betrayal. President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded that such accusations were vile misrepresentations of actuality. The Fort Hunt Conference. The worst fears of Allen Dulles for the post-war period began to materialize in February 1945, when the leaders of the Big Three, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, met at Yalta on the Black Sea to redraw the map of Europe. The eastern border of Germany was moved westward to the Oder and Neisse rivers, and parts of eastern Poland were handed over to the Soviets. What remained of Germany was to be divided into 4 zones of occupation, which would be administered by a council of military generals, including the French. As soon as the ink dried on the Yalta Agreement, Dulles transported Galen and his top representatives to Fort Hunt, Virginia, where they were wined and dined by Donovan and other U.S. officials. An agreement was reached. Galen would return to Germany under U.S. protection to establish the Galen Organization, which would receive full funding from U.S. Army G2 Intelligence Unit resources. The primary purpose of this organization would be the maintenance of the existing stay-behind armies and the recruitment of new guerrilla soldiers from the ranks of Third Reich veterans with staunch anti-communist credentials. These soldiers would no longer be known as werewolves. They were to be known as gladiators, and they would be commissioned to ward off communist invaders in the great theater of post-war Europe. The operation in which they were engaged was to be known as Gladio, after the short swords Roman gladiators used to kill their opponents. Poetry and paranoia. Dulles was not the only OSS official involved in establishing stay-behind units. He was aided by James Jesus Angleton, one of the strangest spooks to emerge from the shadow world of the U.S. intelligence community. A tall figure of spectral thinness, with owlish glasses, Angleton was a rabid anti-communist, an ardent Anglophile, and a devout Roman Catholic. He bred orchids, wore a black Homburg, and drank bourbon for breakfast. A graduate of Yale, Angleton possessed a gift for poetry and had established close friendships with Ezra Pound, E. Cummings, and T.S. Eliot. Fluent in several languages, including German and Italian, he arrived in Rome as the commander of the secret counterintelligence (SCI) unit of the OSS. Few were more qualified for the position. Unfortunately, Angleton was not only brilliant, but also dangerously paranoid, seeing the world as a wilderness of mirrors. In these mirrors he saw reflections of spies and counter-spies, many of whom he felt compelled to eliminate, and the unfolding succession of conspiracy upon conspiracy, all of which required immediate and, at times, murderous resolution. Angleton's father, Hugh, also served the OSS. Before the war, Hugh had been the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Italy and the owner of the Milan branch of the National Cash Register Company. The elder Angleton, who was outspokenly pro-Hitler and pro-Mussolini, had developed extensive contacts throughout Italy that were of great use to his son. One such contact was Prince Junio Valerio Borghese, a member of the Catholic black nobility, the Italian aristocrats who had remained loyal to the Holy See after the rise of Garibaldi in the 19th century. Black Xmas. Borghese was the leader of Decima Flotilla Mas, 10 Light Flotilla, also known as Xmas, an Italian naval commando unit. After Italy signed an armistice with the Allies on September 8, 1943, Borghese and his commandos opted to fight for the so-called Solo Republic that had been set up by the Nazis in northern Italy. His unit was given the task of attacking the Italian partisan bands that had sprouted up throughout Italy. The partisans were sponsored by the Italian Communist Party, Partito Comunista Italiano, or PCI. And, thanks to Xmas, thousands were found hanging from streetlights and flagpoles by the end of the war. On April 13, 1945, Borghese met with General Wolfe and Angleton at a villa on Garda Lake, where they discussed the possibility of extending their war efforts beyond any peace treaty with the Soviets, redeploying Xmas under the covert direction of the OSS. Borghese was amenable to the terms, especially since his cooperation would save him from an Italian firing squad. The Secret Government. On May 15, 1945, when Borghese was arrested and charged with war crimes, Angleton managed to secure his release into U.S. Army custody. The Black Prince was dressed in an American uniform and transported from Milan to Rome. Angleton needed Borghese and the 10,267 fascists who fought under his command to help establish the stay-behind units that would ward off any Soviet aggression. For a while, Angleton and other OSS officials, including Donovan, toyed with the idea of making Borghese the new king of Italy. But soon they came to their senses and realized that the Xmas commander would be of greater use as the leader of a shadow government, with a secret army that could manipulate Italian affairs through the coming decades. To create this government, the U.S. State Department issued a mandate by which the operational resources of the Italian police, the Italian military intelligence, and the Italian Secret Service were placed at the disposal of Angleton and the SCI. Under Borghese, the Gladio forces in Italy were divided into 40 main groups, 10 specialized in sabotage, 6 each in espionage, propaganda, and escape tactics, and 12 in guerrilla activities. A special training camp for members of the stay-behind units was set up in Sardinia, off Italy's western coast. The camp, thanks to the efforts of Galen and Wolfe, was soon swarming with new gladiators from Germany, France, and Austria. By 1946, when the OSS morphed into the Central Intelligence Group, the precursor of the CIA, hundreds of Gladio units were in place throughout Western Europe. The money supply. But there was still a problem that seemed insurmountable. Gladio was a covert operation and had not been initiated by an act of Congress or a mandate from the Pentagon. Few federal officials knew of its existence. The $200 million in original funding came from the Rockefeller and Mellon foundations. But a new and steady stream of revenue had to be created almost overnight, or the world would not be safe for democracy. The future of Gladio would come to reside within America's ghettos. Chapter 2. The Lucky Break. Negroes and Narcotics. What cannot now be denied is that U.S. intelligence agencies arranged for the release from prison of the world's preeminent drug lord, allowed him to rebuild his narcotics empire, watched the flow of drugs into the largely black ghettos of New York and Washington, D.C. escalate, and then lied about what they had done. This founding saga of the relationship between American spies and gangsters set patterns that would be replicated from Laos and Burma to Marseille and Panama. Alexander Cockburn and Jeffrey St. Clair, Whiteout, the CIA, Drugs, and the Press. Colonel Paul E. Hellawell had one hell of an idea. It came to him in China, where he was serving as Chief of Special Intelligence for the OSS. Hellawell's idea would result in a union between the U.S. intelligence community and organized crime that would result in conflicts, wars, rebellions, financial upheavals, and an epidemic that would forever alter the flow of world history. Mainstream books about the CIA, like Tim Weiner's Legacy of Ashes, make no mention of Hellawell, his relationship with Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, his creation of the Castle Bank in the Bahamas, and his grand experiment on the black community of Harlem. In the flood of CIA documents released since 1992, one does not find Hellawell's name in the archival indices of the National Archive, the National Security Archive, or the Federation of American Scientists. In the million declassified pages stored and indexed on the website of the Mary Farrell Foundation, Hellawell's name appears only once, on a list of documents withheld from inspection during the CIA's 1974 search for records concerning Watergate. This silence about the principal architect of the post-war CIA drug connection exceeds all standards of eloquence. Within Kunming, a town within the South China province of Yunnan, Hellawell observed that General Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Kuomintang, KMT, the Chinese National Army, sold opium to Chinese addicts in order to raise funds for his army's planned war against the communist forces of Mao Zedong. Since Hellawell's task was to provide covert assistance to the KMT, what better help could he provide than steady shipments of opiates for the good general? Hellawell presented this idea to his boss, General William Wild Bill Donovan. Donovan shared it with James Jesus Angleton, Allen Dulles, the OSS Swiss director, and William Little Bill Stevenson, master spy of the British Security Coordination. Delighted with the concept, the officials arranged to funnel money to Hellawell, who now became the man who controlled the pipeline of covert funds for secret operations throughout Asia. The money for the opiates would eventually come from Nazi gold that had been laundered and manipulated by Dulles and Stevenson through the World Commerce Corporation, a financial firm established by Wild Bill. But that was still in the future. By the close of World War II, Hellawell and a number of fellow Army intelligence officers, E. Howard Hunt of Watergate fame, Lucien Conen, a former member of the French Foreign Legion with strong ties to the Corsican Mafia, Tommy the Cork Corcoran, a lawyer serving the Strategic Service Unit, and Lieutenant General Claire L. Chenault, the military advisor to Chiang Kai-shek and the founder of the Flying Tigers, had created the Civil Air Transport, CAT, from surplus aircraft, including C-47 Dakotas and C-46 Commandos. The CAT fleet transported weapons to a contingency force of the KMT in Burma. The planes were then loaded with drugs for their return trip to China. The pilots who flew these Bush-type aircraft were a motley group of men, often serving as agents or go-betweens with the Chinese national guerrillas and the opium buyers. Some were former Nazis, others part of the band of expatriates that emerges in countries following any war. Hellawell and his compatriots had created a model for trafficking in drugs that would result in the formation of Air America, the CIA fleet of planes that transported opiates and cocaine during and after the Vietnam conflict. Thanks to their efforts, Burma's Shan Plateau would grow from a relatively minor poppy cultivating area into the largest opium-producing region of the world. Ghetto Gold. Wild Bill had drafted...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?